Should China pay for the coronavirus? Around the world, people are demanding reparations, but the Chinese Communist Party is having none of it. Welcome back to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. So, how's your quarantine going? Been kind of a long time, hasn't it? Maybe getting a little upset at the Chinese Communist Party for covering up the coronavirus just long enough for it to spread around the world. Well, the Chinese Communist Party understands your feelings and is trying to subvert them. According to this op-ed by the Chinese ambassador to the U.S., now isn't the time for finger-pointing, it's the time for cooperation. Definitely not the time for scapegoating other countries. Unless it's, Chinese state-run media trying to scapegoat the U.S. We're seeing this kind of bipolar rhetoric because the Chinese Communist Party is in trouble. They can't let the world hold them accountable for the coronavirus, or as I call it, the CCP virus. Well, here's President Trump last week.
Well, Charlie, there are a lot of ways you can hold them accountable. We're doing very serious investigations, as you probably know, and we are not happy with China.
A lot of ways? Are there specific ways we can hold the Communist Party accountable?
Beijing is going to pay an enormous reputational price for this.
Oh, wonderful. The coronavirus has cost the world trillions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of lives, but Beijing might not have a great reputation anymore. So let's be a bit more specific. It's going to be very difficult to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for covering up the CCP virus. That's because China has tremendous power over international institutions, like the United Nations. China sits on the UN Security Council and can veto just about anything. And even if somehow the UN did rule against the Communist Party, they'll just ignore it. Like that time in 2016 when a UN tribunal rejected Beijing's claims in the South China Sea. Beijing just rejected the tribunal's ruling and then built a bunch of military bases in violation of the ruling. On the other hand, we've all got a lot of time on our hands right now, don't we? And you know who else has a lot of time on their hands? The US Congress. And some of them are using that time to come up with ways to hold China accountable for the CCP virus. I know, shocking. Even more shocking, it's bipartisan. Republican Marco Rubio has introduced a bill called the Strengthening America's Supply Chain and National Security Act. It's targeted at lessening America's reliance on pharmaceutical products from certain countries. No country in particular. Although it comes after Communist Party mouthpiece Xinhua said China could impose pharmaceutical export controls to, quote, throw America into the mighty sea of the coronavirus. Like I said, no country in particular. Anyway, Republican Senator Marco Rubio's legislation has gained the support of Democratic senators like Tim Kaine, Chris Murphy, and Elizabeth Warren. Meanwhile, Republican members of the House of Representatives have introduced this legislation that would authorize the president to impose sanctions on foreign officials for the deliberate concealment or distortion of information about public health emergencies of international concern. They're calling this the Li Wenliang Global Public Health Accountability Act of 2020. In case you don't know, Li Wenliang was the Chinese doctor who got in trouble with the police for warning his colleagues about the coronavirus on social media back in December. He later died of the coronavirus. So I guess this act is kind of aimed at one country in particular. Meanwhile, Senator Josh Hawley wrote this memo saying a fourth stimulus package should tackle America's supply chain issues. Never again should the American people find themselves vulnerable to the Chinese Communist Party for critical medical supplies and industrial components in a moment of crisis. Okay, so yeah, this one is obviously about China. Senator Ben Sasse says the U.S. should also get other countries on board to investigate what the Chinese Communist Party has done. China needs to pay a price at the international level. A full investigation into China's initial cover-up of the outbreak and ongoing propaganda campaign. The U.S. should lead the international community in determining an appropriate punishment once that investigation is finished. One way the international community could work together is seizing assets of Chinese state-owned companies in their countries. According to John Yu, a law professor at UC Berkeley, under its Belt and Road Initiative, Beijing reportedly has loaned billions to developing nations in Africa, Eastern Europe, and Latin America, and then taken over their strategic ports and facilities once the debts fall due. The U.S. could turn this strategy on its head by supporting the expropriation of these assets by legal process and the cancellation of these debts as compensation for coronavirus losses. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party rejects calls for compensation. Surprise! Here's China's foreign ministry spokesman.
睁着眼睛说瞎话.
Since the outbreak began, China has always acted in an open, transparent, and responsible manner, and has taken a series... Chris, I can't keep reading this.
但是事实是胜于...
Yeah, I don't think I could have gone through that either. But the Communist Party does not like to be blamed. When that happens, they tend to lash out.
I would like to stress that the U.S. politicians are ignoring the facts and lying repeatedly, with the sole purpose of deflecting attention and responsibility for their insufficient response to epidemic prevention and control at home.
Well, according to China's foreign ministry, this is all a conspiracy by the U.S. government. And the Chinese Communist Party knows exactly how to get us to blame each other for it. They've started calling it a cover-up by the Republicans. But it's far more than Trump or Republicans or even just Americans calling for China to be held accountable. The London-based International Council of Jurists and All India Bar Association filed a joint complaint to the UN Human Rights Council seeking compensation from China, which sounds like a good idea, except China is part of the UN Human Rights Council. The largest newspaper in Germany said in an article called What China Already Owes Us that China owes $160 billion. In response, the Chinese embassy in Germany wrote that some politicians, experts, and media want mutual blame to distract them from their own failures and weaknesses. When Australia floated the idea of an independent investigation into the origin of the CCP virus, the editor-in-chief of my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, wrote, "Australia is always messing around. I feel it's a bit like chewing gum stuck to the soles of China's shoes. Sometimes you have to find a stone to scrape it off." Yeah, calling Australians chewing gum stuck to China's shoes, that'll make Australians not want to retaliate with an investigation. You know what else helps? Having the Chinese ambassador to Australia say that Beijing could encourage Chinese citizens to boycott Australian exports and products if Australia was to initiate the probe. Also having the Chinese embassy accuse Australia of petty tricks. Well, now I'm convinced that an independent investigation is totally necessary. So what do you think? Leave your comments below. And remember, this show is supported mainly through the direct support of viewers through the crowdfunding website Patreon. Go to patreon.com/AmericaUncovered to learn more. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.